Welcome. If you've ever wondered what Linux actually is and why so many people swear by it, you're in the right place. This is part one of a six-part journey called Foundations, where we'll explore what Linux is, where it came from, and why it quietly powers most of the world's computers. So let's get started. Here's the path we'll take together in this first part. We'll start by cutting through the jargon to define what Linux really is, then take a quick trip back to 1991 to see how it began as one student's side project. From there, we'll look at where Linux is hiding in your daily life, break down its inner structure into four simple pieces, demystify those things called distributions, and finish with why all of this actually matters for you. So let's start with the basics. At its core, Linux is a kernel. That's the deep, behind-the-scenes layer of software that talks directly to your computer's hardware, managing things like the processor, memory, and disk. Sitting on top of it, you've got the shell and utilities, and then your everyday applications. But on its own, a kernel isn't very useful, which is why communities and companies bundle it with everything else into complete systems called distributions. Names you might have heard, like Ubuntu, Debian, or Fedora. Since those three words get tangled up all the time, here's the cleanest way to think about them. The kernel is the engine. It talks to the hardware, but you can't really drive an engine on its own. Add the basic tools around it, the shell, file utilities, system services, and now you've got an operating system, the engine plus a chassis. And a distribution is the finished car, an installer, a package manager, a desktop, ready-to-use software like Ubuntu, what you actually download and run. So where did this finished car actually come from? Back in 1991, a Finnish student named Linus Torvalds posted about 10,000 lines of code to a Usenet newsgroup. Just a hobby project. 2 years later, Debian kicked off the era of community-built distributions, Ubuntu made Linux approachable for regular people in 2004, and by 2008, Android quietly slipped the Linux kernel into billions of pockets. Today, it runs roughly 96% of the top million web servers and every single one of the world's fastest supercomputers. Not by design, just by being free, open, and good enough to keep improving. And those numbers from a moment ago hint at something bigger. If you've sent a text, opened a website, asked a voice assistant a question, or streamed a show today, you've almost certainly touched Linux without realizing it. Every Android phone runs a Linux kernel at its core. Over 90% of cloud workloads on AWS and Azure run on it, and it powers everything from your home router to the satellites overhead. So the real question isn't whether you use Linux. It's whether you'd like to understand the thing you're already depending on. So let's open up this thing you're depending on and see what's actually inside. A Linux system is built in layers, stacked on top of the hardware itself. Right above the metal sits the kernel, the core that manages memory, CPU time, and talks to your devices. On top of that, system libraries like glibc or OpenSSL provide ready-made code so every program doesn't have to reinvent math or networking. Then comes the shell. That's the interpreter, usually bash, that turns the commands you type into kernel calls. And at the very top, the applications, your browser, your editor, the things you actually see and use. Now those layers get bundled together into what's called a distribution, a complete, ready-to-use Linux system. There are hundreds out there, but almost all trace back to one of three families. The Debian family, including Ubuntu and Mint, uses the apt package manager and is the friendliest starting point. The Red Hat family, Fedora, Rocky, Alma Linux, uses DNF and dominates the enterprise world. And the Arch family, with Pacman, is for those who want to build their system piece by piece. So with all those options, which one should you actually pick? For most absolute beginners, the answer is Ubuntu LTS, the long-term support version. It has a massive community, predictable 5-year support, and almost every tutorial you'll find online assumes you're running it. That said, if you're coming from Windows, Linux Mint feels more familiar. Fedora gives you newer software, Pop, OS handles gaming and NVIDIA hardware beautifully, and Debian is the choice when stability matters more than novelty. Now you might still be wondering, Why bother learning a whole new operating system at all? Well, here are 6 good reasons. It's completely free with no license fees no matter how many machines you install it on. You're in control. No forced updates, no telemetry quietly phoning home. Security is strong thanks to its permission model and fast patching. It breathes new life into old hardware that Windows would choke on. It's the natural home for developers. Most cloud servers run Linux, and behind it all is a huge, decades-old community ready to answer almost any question you can think of. But it's only fair to be honest. Linux isn't perfect, and switching does come with trade-offs. Yes, you gain total control, real privacy, better performance on modest hardware, and skills that carry straight over into the world of servers and cloud computing. But on the other hand, some commercial software like Adobe's Creative Suite simply won't run. Certain games are off limits. Very new hardware can be hit or miss, and sooner or later you'll need to get comfortable with the terminal. Going in with clear eyes is the best way to avoid frustration later. And the good news is, you don't have to commit to anything to find out if Linux is for you. There are 5 low-risk ways to take it for a spin. A live USB lets you boot Linux straight from a stick without touching your hard drive. A virtual machine runs it like an app inside your current system. WSL gives Windows users a full Linux terminal with a single command. Dual booting installs it alongside Windows. Just back up first. And for around $5 a month, you can rent a cloud server and practice on the real thing. So let's pull the threads together. Linux itself is just the kernel, the core engine. And what you actually install is a distribution that bundles it with tools and software. It's already running quietly all around you, and the distro world breaks down into a few main families, with Ubuntu LTS being the friendliest place to start. And remember, you can try the whole thing risk-free before you commit to anything. And that brings us to the end of Part 1. Next time, in Part 2, we'll open up the terminal together and start actually typing. Your first real commands, moving through files and folders, and making that shift from clicking to typing. It's where Linux really starts to feel powerful. So get a distro ready, and I'll see you in Part 2.